Good evening, everyone. Kenneth Bunas here of the Design Center of the Philippines, and I will be your moderator for tonight. During this time of the Great Reset, design and designers are tasked with a great undertaking of reimagining, rewiring, and upscaling our normal, making it adaptive to these rapidly changing times. Tonight's sessions ask, where do we even begin? How can we build a remarkable human-centric design experience from data? I know it's a bit late in the evening, but I can assure you that our session with Giorgia Lupi is well worth it as she will be discussing the human side of data. Before we head straight to it, let me ask you a poll first. If you were to visualize a daily or regular activity of yours for a week during this lockdown as data, what would you visualize? A, Netflix shows watched. B, Zoom meetings attended. C, types of coffee drinks made, or D, your workout routine. I will give you a few moments to answer. While you are doing that, I would like to thank our partners for this year's International Design Conference. Adobe Magazine, our official media partner, Buensalido Architects, and British Council, our event partners. Thank you very much for championing a better normal by design. Have you guys given your answers yet? If not, don't worry, we will give you more time. I think it's time we call our speaker for tonight, information designer and partner at Pentagram, Giorgia Lupi, on the spotlight. For questions that you might have, please feel free to leave a comment down below during Giorgia's talk so we can discuss further during our fireside chat. So let's have it. Our speaker for tonight is Giorgia Lupi. She is a renowned information designer. Her commendable work on the humanistic approach to data and design has challenged and transformed many schools of thought and ideation and information. She is currently a partner at Pentagram, the world's largest independent design consultancy, where she continues to do what she does best, build rich stories and create exceptional experiences through data. Now, let us all welcome Giorgia Lupi.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Giorgia.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening.
Yeah, it's great to have you here tonight, Giorgia. And for now, I will leave you for a bit and I'll be back to join you for our fireside chat. The virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen to start. All right, so how are we doing? Good evening. I know it's late there. It's morning here in New York. It's 9 a.m. I'm really excited about these, even though obviously I would have loved to be there in person. So my name is Giorgia and I define myself as an information designer. And that means that every day with my team, we shape and design the different ways that my clients and their clients access different kind of information, and in my case, specifically data. But data that can be qualitative and quantitative, big and small, data that organizations already have, but also most of the time crafted by myself and my team in collaboration with our clients. And data that we then represent visually, translating numbers into images through data visualizations and through building interactive experiences with these visualizations. And my work with data is very particular and visually driven. And to give you a sense, I will play a montage of the work that we did in the past year with Accurate, the company that I co-founded 9 years ago and where I was the design director up until last year before joining Pentagram. And the images that you will see, obviously every color, size, position, and animation of the elements are direct representation of data points. And before getting to the core of what I want to talk tonight, I want to give you a quick idea of the variety of data-driven projects that you can work on from a design perspective, and on the other way around, the design projects that you can approach from a data-driven perspective. For example, in the past years, we spent from working with newspapers and magazines. This is a very early collaboration with the Sunday cultural supplement of the main Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera, where from 2012 to 2014, we designed more than 40 data analysis and data visualizations, but probably not the visualizations that you would expect on a national newspaper. Every week, we looked for data on a main topic, combining and overlaying different layers of information on cultural and social phenomena with many layers of context that then we visualized with a unique language really created and crafted specifically for the data stories that we found, as you can see from these previews. To working with clients like IBM, where in 2017 we designed instead a system of guidelines for all their data products or their data visualizations. So first of all, guidelines on how to work with data effectively on a daily basis, data visualization effectively on a daily basis. A lot of do's and don'ts about really how to represent data. But also guidelines that could translate the great design heritage that IBM has built over the years into how they work with data. So guidelines that would make their chart look and feel like IBM, taking a clear visual inspiration from IBM's material from the past, and even venturing into looking at physical objects, part of the IBM tradition, to really translate into data visualization concepts. But also to environmental experiences with data. This is for the Milan Triennale called Broken Nature at the Design Museum in Milan that happened 2 years ago, where we created a data wallpaper for what we call the Room of Change. And in this case, it was a data tapestry that, flowing on a timeline from left to right, illustrates really how multiple aspects of our environment have changed in the past century, or they are still changing, and they likely continue to change. In this case, data that we illustrated through a number of global data sets on nature, society, technology, and science, as well as single and specific contextual stories, such as the disappearing of the lake Aral because of climate change. So really mixing the global trends with actually data set that people can relate to, with a legend on the center to invite visitors to discover this very complex world of change. To creating even more physical installations with data, this is the recent Starbucks Reserve Roastery that opened in Milan, Italy 1 year ago, where we designed a data visualization carved in this big brass wall using different carving techniques, perforation, and lightning to represent different data points, depicting the timeline of the history of the brand, the coffee making process, and the places in the world that really have been fundamental for Starbucks history in this very unconventional way, if you think about it. And in this case, a wall that can also be experienced through augmented reality through a mobile app that we designed and developed that brings this data to life, adding a digital layer that interacts with the physical environment, and really where we turned this wall into a living artwork with access to many extra data-driven content. And I want to share one last piece of context on where I am in this moment before digging into a few specific ideas that I want to share around data in this moment in time. So recently, before last summer, I joined Pentagram, which is the biggest independent design firm in the world. So in 2019, as a partner in their New York office. We are 25 partners globally. I was the ninth partner in New York. We have offices in London, Berlin, and Austin. And this is a picture of all of us in person, the last time that we saw each other in person last year at our global gathering. And so Pentagram is an incredibly exciting space for me because I believe that my partners, way before I joined, have significantly contributed in shaping our collective visual culture for almost the past 50 years, forming our relationship with brands, with the products and the products that we use every day and the built environment through brand identity projects, through signage, wayfinding, environmental graphics, really branding visually many of the iconic places that we walk by every day, and ultimately visually shaping a piece of our relationship to our society, if you think about it. And joining Pentagram for me means to further my practice and to try to integrate the language of data into even more mundane experiences, into what we see, what we use, what we consume, and even where. Because let's take a step back. What is data? Like, for many of us, data feels not so connected with real life, and it might even have a nebulous meaning. often associated with numbers, technologies, and only algorithm, and often really seen as scary and complicated and mostly cold and inhuman, kind of overwhelming. But there's another approach to what we so coldly call data that has always interested me more. That is to remember always that data is an abstract representation of our reality. Data is a lens, a filter that we can use to see our world through, and any aspects of our world, and especially of our human nature and society, one subject at a time. And then it's a narrative and a creative material to base design experiences on, really to communicating this knowledge and these stories to different audiences, because it's only through seeing data represented visually that our human brain can actually grasp them and understand them. And in fact, and I'm really getting to the core of what I want to talk about today, what I want to talk mostly tonight about is the data that we don't see. The data that are not already in form of a spreadsheet, but that they, in my opinion, are the most interesting type of data that we need to focus on if we want to really unveil hidden patterns around us. And the one that can really unlock the potential of data to tell very human and relatable story. And you will see what I mean, hopefully. So I want to start with a very radical experiment where no technology was involved. It was a self-initiated project that after years of working pretty much only on digital experiences, such as the one we've seen before, and with quote unquote, again, big data sets, really reconnected me to the very nature of data. It's called Dear Data, and it's a collaboration with London-based designer Stephanie Pozovic. So Stephanie and I met only twice in our lives when we decided to run this very weird experiment around one main question. Is it possible to get to know another human being through data only? So for Dear Data, every week and for 1 year, we used our personal data to get to know each other. So personal data around weekly shared mundane topics, from our thoughts and ideas to our most intimate feeling, from our belongings to our apologies and laughter. So 52 excuses in form of data to really investigate and reveal particular aspects of ourselves and about our days. So personal data that we will then manually hand-drawn on a postcard-sized sheet of paper that every week was sent from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, where she lives, for 1 year. Where the front of the card was always the data drawing, and the back of the postcard contained the address of the other person and the legend, so how to interpret our drawings. And Stephanie and I collected our data manually, really to force us to focus on all the nuances that devices cannot gather, or at least not yet, and using data to explore our minds and not only our activities, and really getting insights on the things that matter the most to us. For example, at week number 3, we tracked the thank yous we said and we received, who they were for and from, what they were about, if it were really meant, if it were in real life or digitally over the phone. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. I should have said it more. And in this example, by looking at my week through the lens of this particular layer, I realized that I thank most of the people that I don't know, that I didn't know well, but really I didn't thank enough the people who were close to me. And so we started to look at our days through data, such in this case where I mapped my complaints, borrowing very literal visual inspiration to the music notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints over time. But not only quantifying, again, the number of times we performed a certain action, really adding context and details about why, what was happening, what was the situation, the feeling, realizing week after week how to put ourselves in these numbers. And also realizing the importance of adding context and qualitative aspects to make the data truly representative of ourselves. And so over 52 weeks, we map our envies and the feeling that triggered in us, our desired and what they told about us, our emotion and decisions, apologies, and many more. And really ultimately creating intimate portraits of ourselves to share with the other person through this invisible layer of data. And so I guess you start seeing what I mean by the data we don't see. In this case, data that are, to me, much more interesting than what we usually associate with personal data collections, such as the number of steps, the expenses patterns, or calories intakes. So I guess there's really much more that we can explore. And this is true for small and big data, for personal data and beyond. So Dear Data also became a book. That is a 3rd edition. And the original set of postcards have found the most exciting home as they've been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which has been quite nice. But what excites us even more is that Dear Data has been so well received outside of the data community. So we've seen thousands of postcards made by people who learned about the project and really wanted to experiment on themselves. And even teachers of any grade that they're using this format to teach their students the world of data. So if you think about it, starting from human observation, from human question, as opposed to what is already in form of data. So with this first example, you've seen that we can turn even the smallest details of our lives into data that we can look at to see things from a different perspective. But besides personal data, we can do that anywhere and everywhere. So I'm often asked, where do you find data? And I'm replying lately more and more that I often design my data sets. And you'll see what I mean with this other example. So in 2017, I've had the great honor to collaborate with Paola Antonelli. She's the senior curator of design and architecture at MoMA, and her team on a piece, a visual piece that closed the show that was called Items, Is Fashion Modern? That, you know, some of you might have seen if you were like following MoMA. So the show presented 111 items of clothing and accessories that have had a strong impact and influence on our culture. From the bikini to the burkini, from the Patagonia fleece jacket to the balaclava, the pencil skirt, the tights, the Tiva sandals, a tattoo, sunscreen. So really a very, I would say, heterogeneous, but very curated list of elements. And I've had the incredible opportunity to create a site-specific, hand-drawn, after the data, visualization to guide visitors at the end of the exhibition to explore the features of the items, both individually and as part of a bigger ecosystem. So this is how it looked like in the lobby. But what's really interesting is that I didn't have any data. I only had the list of the 111 objects and the background research conducted by the curatorial team on each of them. And so I put on the glasses of the data collector and I kind of like delved into these 111 stories and searched for bits of qualitative and quantitative information that actually could help me as a designer answer a few main questions, really to understand and reveal why was each item included in the show. And so the questions that I asked to build my data sets are, for example, was the item a medium or a message? Meaning, is it iconic and has it been included in the collection because of its technical and aesthetical features or for what it represents? And another type of question, are they worn to conform to a movement or to escape to a movement? Meaning, if it is a message, as it becomes a way to blend into a social context, into a group of culture, or to break free from it? And many more of this kind, crafting the data set from these questions. Where data, we're absolutely not in this form before this analog process. So really, I guess you start seeing what I mean by the data that normally are not already there, but are really, I believe, the most intriguing one to tell personal stories or, you know, to tell actually human stories. And then each one of these items became a symbol that I drew on the wall that was positioned and visualized according to the set of attributes that I put together with the curator over a timeline horizontally and vertically following the flow of the exhibition and the different areas that Paola organized into, with actually a legend on the left side wall to guide visitors on how to interpret it. And so the whole point of my exercise was to start from the final manifestation of the process and really work backward. So really reconstructing the invisible data set that Paola and her team used as an input for their design, even without knowing it. And then making it visible for everybody to see through the lens of data, something that to me is incredibly valuable. And over the years, I, myself, and my team use this process to a variety of projects of different kind, where every topic, every world and situation can be really parsed through the lens of data. So I want to make another example here so that you see a more straightforward application of what might have seemed before only an artistic process. So we released last year a project for Space 10, which is IKEA's research laboratory. It's part of this report, Digital in Architecture. So it was a report produced by Space 10 that looks into how digital tools for design and fabrication in architecture have contributed to the built environment. And we created a data visualization for the report. It was really meant to be printed very big. It was kind of like a coffee table report. So the visualization that explores the history of buildings, movements, and tools that really influence the shift towards the digital architecture. It's a 5-panel gatefold inserted in the document. And it follows a timeline mapping the key developments that shape what is known as a digital thinking in architecture. So I will give you a preview of how the single elements look like, and then I will explain. we conducted a deep research to build the database. A research of 160 projects and buildings that have been crucial to shape the movement. So we identified the buildings together with the researcher who worked on the report. So here we didn't even have a list before, but we crafted and created the list and then the data set with the experts who were collaborating with us. And from here, we sketched and designed the best way to represent our crafted attributes. Every element in this timeline from left to right is one building. And the visual features, so the colors, the sizes, the symbol in the different parts of the element represent the data set that we built. And actually, if you see that visually resembling the architectural blueprints, really give personality to the visualization as well. And actually visually paying a homage to Zaha Hadid's famous parametric sketches from 1989. I'm actually an architect as a background, so this project for me was kind of like really merging what I've studied to what I ended up doing. So it was kind of cool for me. So we looked at primary information like the building's innovation. So why was that building revolutionary? Was it for an innovative technology, use of material, a never seen before floor plan, or to consider sustainability aspects, and also relevance, why it is still relevant now and for future development? And then we included contextual information on the building's height, footprint, exterior material, location, and build status. I mean, you can really see at this point, of course, how data visualization is about building rules for yourself. Like if it is Canon, I will paint this pink. If it is collaborative practice, I will paint that green. So, you know, it's really about like building a legend for yourself and then kind of like really crafting the attributes into that. And then we included movements and important digital tools, and this is again the legend that explains it, and that was meant really to be a very deep and rich type of read. So of course nothing that you can glance and really understand, but it was kind of like really a cultural piece that required, of course, engagement. That was kind of the brief from our client. And then, of course, the indication of the timeline is at the bottom, and the gray backgrounds that you see shapes. These shapes are the different movements, so neo-modernism. And from a representation and design perspective, as always in my process, as you've seen up until now, I never use standard representation, but I always craft unique visual languages and I sketch art. So visual languages that can really uniquely represent the data that we work with. And in this case, such as I think is also an opportunity to visually speak the language of the content, in this case, architecture, and to produce a much more memorable piece, like a piece that probably people will remember more. And so to get back to really the core of the thread that I'm trying to follow here, in similar situations, we don't see these invisible layers. First of all, because we often don't observe and collect this type of like more qualitative and human types of data, but also because nobody carefully designed experiences to elevate them and to reveal them, even when they were present all along. And design here plays a very important role. And, you know, I'm excited to speak at this design conference. So moving on, I have a few examples that kind of really move on from the actual design of the visual model, but really talks about the design of an experience that so that you can see that more strong. So in 2017, the organizers of the TED conference came to us before the latest edition in Vancouver. It was still a physical in-person conference with a challenging brief. So how can we use data from the conference participants to give something valuable back to them? And so, you know, initially in the beginning, we imagined to create an installation on a big wall where we could use an algorithm to match participants with similar profiles, like their job position, their country of origin. But ultimately, in what way would this data be meaningful for them? And once more, we decided to look for data in less obvious places. We created what we called data portraits of all of the people who were at TED. So images that were based on people's answers to a series of questions and translated into a unique hand-drawn data-driven image where every color, symbol, and position of the elements that you're seeing is a direct translation of one person's answer. And these images were then immediately printed on buttons. The images that you saw before was me hand drawing, but then also we created a software that was able to recreate it for people that didn't want to necessarily wait for having me draw the portraits. So immediately these images were printed on buttons that people would wear throughout the conference and use as a tool for sparking conversations and finding commonalities with others. So we asked simple but evocative questions, and you can read on the legend on the right, such as which TED letter are you? Do you identify more with technology, entertainment, or design? And do you get your best ideas after an adult beverage or while at work? How messy is your desk? Or how many unread emails in your inbox before you freak out? And people at TED were wearing these abstract symbols on their badges. And they would use them to identify similarities and differences with other people at a first glance as they kind of like were walking through the conference. So really an excuse to introduce themselves and an icebreaker to start a conversation that is much more meaningful than saying, hey, I'm Giorgia, I'm an information designer, what do you do? So really, ultimately, if you wanted to connect, even something that could spark a different type of conversation, I can tell you, I mean, that is being received really, really quite well. So here we have been working with soft and definitely small data, but in this case, that through how we designed the experience proved to be more meaningful than anything bigger or that we could have gathered digitally or automatically. So I always say that bigger data doesn't necessarily mean better data. So we replicated this data portrait idea at a few other events where the information was sent in advance to the attendees. And where, of course, again, the portrait came with a legend. In this case, we also used the brand identity, kind of like the brand identity of the whole conference as graphic elements to play with. And then we also made this experience completely digital and collective at this recent event that was part of the IBM Think Summit in Milan, where we created this interactive data flag that visualized the attendees' thoughts and around the topic of the summit. Where the survey happened within the space of the mobile app that they've already downloaded for the event. And really kind of like depicting an animated collective representation of the audience where each symbol represents a single person and their ideas. And in this case, this collective collection of thoughts have been used by the presenters, the moderators on stage to really promote a dialogue with the audience about the very themes of the conference and how the attendees reacted to them. And also, finally, we turned this concept into a completely interactive and collective installation at the Museum of the City of New York. That was part of a show that was called, I mean, it's technically still up there, but the museum is closed. So it's still up there, called Who We Are, Visualizing New York by the Numbers. So an exhibition that opened in anticipation to the 20th census. So really a show that highlighted the importance of the census. And we've been invited to create an original piece to contribute to the show where we want to pretty much, whatever we wanted, like around the idea of identity and counting and documenting. So we called it What Counts, and with that, we questioned the fundamental information that was asked on the census. So what counts as two core components, a large projection on the gallery wall and an interactive iPad interface in the middle of the space. As they walked by, visitors could answer a short questionnaire on this iPad about themselves and their identity. And for example, here are some of the questions. If you had to pick only one, which of the following best describe you? Responsible and reliable, ambitious and driven, imaginative, creative. Or compared to others, I believe I am completely unique, unique in most way, unique in some way. You kind of like get the point. And then what is most important to you? Living by my values, belonging to a circle of family of friends. I will not read them all to you. How do you personally define home as opposed to where do you live? And then you feel the way you currently having life is enough. And this one is about what you would hope the next generation will enjoy better than you. And finally, is the future is bright or green? And as you might have guessed, a unique visual symbol is really generated on the iPad as you move through the survey. So it did a portrait that represents the combination of your unique answers. And so once the survey is completed, you can physically swipe your data portrait to the gallery wall, where you will join this animated projection of all of the data portraits collected since the beginning. And so your portrait is contributing to this dynamic graphic on the wall, as we've seen in the IBM Think Summit. But in this case, we conceive the question as a provoking response to the questions that are asked in the census that are pretty much only demographic, really invited us to think about how do we want to be counted, what matters to be counted about us. And we intentionally designed the data portrait as hand-drawn and imperfect, contrasting with the clinical charts that are typically used to visualize the census. And in the animated projection, as you will see, the questions are also unpacked, so you can really see how the different people responded to the different questions. Again, so revealing the singular responses and how many people participated in clusters. This was the very first day, so we had really a few responses, but now we have thousands and thousands. A legend, of course, is close to the projection to interpret what you're seeing. And to be reminded of the collective experience, you can also print your unique data portrait on a button. These are to take home and wear. These are some of the ones we printed. And of course, they're hooked to a legend, which, as you've seen, is kind of like a very important part of my process. And then the installation continued to collect data, even throughout the months when the museum was open. In this case, also creating an ongoing visual record of the visitors of the museum, which is another interesting thing to think about. All right, there's also the data. Let's get a little bit more not technical here, but kind of like a little bit more like news related to the news. There's also the data that we don't see because as an audience, we're normally not presented with them, or the data that we don't see because we're not seeing them together at the same time. And so I'd like to show you now two self-initiated projects, so no clients, ideas that from us at Pentagram that with my team we've worked on during the early moments of the pandemic. The first one is a straightforward redesign of what here in New York have been the daily data presentation on the pandemic that we had. So I don't know how much you're familiar with what was going on in the media in New York in the beginning of the pandemic, but the governor, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the New York State, used to deliver daily press conferences since when COVID started. At 11:30 a.m., everybody was like tuning in to hear Cuomo, really everybody in New York. And so he also became pretty famous for his PowerPoint slides that were actually really good at supporting his narrative. And daily, he also presented data. And like many New Yorkers, really, we organized our days around his daily data briefing, around the number of hospitalizations, the number of lives lost, and the infection rate. And these are some of the slides that, were really every day there. So we really, really appreciated Cuomo's approach. But we also saw an opportunity to improve these charts, to inject more context, more nuances and layer of information, really to help people frame the situation as a whole. So we decided to take a crack at redesign of the deck and imagine what could be improved. So in these early sketches, we are taking the three main charts that he usually presented and started to see what can be added to provide comparison and an extra understanding of context. We also thought to create some additional charts, for example, on the number of tests performed that normally didn't present. And so we came to a redesign that I'm going to explain step by step, and that fundamentally runs around the idea of layering information and adding context. So this is what he presented daily, and this image is just a graphic redesign for clarity purpose from us. So nothing new. Number of hospitalizations for COVID cases over time. But what if you start layering the new hospitalizations that he presented in a different data sets over the same data and start seeing the two trends, if they're all going down together or only one? And what about the patients that got into the hospital but actually got discharged as recovered? So these data are available, but they never are presented. So we thought to add it to the bottom to make this information even more contextual. And as a last layer to this version, there's the net change in hospitalization as well, which is kind of like redundant. It means like the difference between people that get admitted to the hospital and people that actually got discharged to the hospital. But it's redundant, but it's kind of like a trend that helps giving an idea of the relationship, again, between the new hospitalizations and the released patients. Well, then remembering his charts on the bottom left, you also see he presented the number of daily deaths, lives lost due to COVID. Just zooming in, and he presented them as numbers. But is there a way to make this very sad statistic a bit more human to help people quantify the loss? And so we paused on one day and we depicted the 540 lives lost on that day as 540 uniquely drawn dots, representing again 540 unique individuals that are not with us anymore. And then we quantified the trend for the past days, but still visualizing, quantifying these very set numbers. And then, as I mentioned, there were also numbers that we were not presented with, such as the number of COVID tests given. And, well, of course, we want to know how many were positive out of the total. But wait, can we relate that to the first chart? How many of these positive found cases then needed to go to the hospital? And this is the very first data that you saw, the very first data he presented daily, layered here. So layered on top of the many tests given, the positive results, and then the hospitalization. And isn't it way more powerful to see the relationship, which is actually trending not as bad, as opposed to only the number of new hospitalizations in a vacuum, which was this one? And now you see that in context, but also, think about these tests and those positive cases. They look very many, and there actually are. But what if we can contextualize them even more? We can by comparing them to the total population of New York. And of course, though, there's some uncertainty, there's fuzziness, there's what we don't know. There are cases that we might not count, either because they are asymptomatic or because they have not been in hospital. So we injected a layer of uncertainty as well, treating missing data as data points. And finally, how about combining this data that you're seeing here? And this is a final chart where also we added the number of lost at little dots at the bottom, in this case, grouping them, 1 dot equals 30 people. And yes, this is a chart that requires a little more reading, but if you do layer all this information on top of each other, you can kind of really get to a better layer of understanding. And so I guess you start to see the point again, and the data that we normally do not see. Following up, though, during the pandemic, all of us also were on the lookout for any possible excuse to feel positive, optimistic, to have faith, trust in humanity and the world. And another self-initiated project is called Happy Data. We ideated and designed a website and social media campaign that we called Happy Data, that in this case spotlights encouraging and positive data points. And we visualize this as hand-drawn drawings and different windows, pictures that we take from our windows during social isolation, during home isolation. So views from our apartment into positive facts around the world, as we really found ourselves daily daydreaming out of our windows, imagining what the future might hold. And so really we start searching for happy data, like small but mighty numbers that, while really insignificant compared to the more urgent statistic about the toll of the virus and the pandemic, but also that could help us see a picture new reality post-pandemic. This one, for example, talks about all the healthcare professionals across the country that answered the call in March and traveled to New York to help fight the pandemic that we had with overwhelmed hospitals. These talks about how cities across the country have closed street down to the car to allow residents to spend time outside while maintaining social distancing. This is about the increased volunteering and the number of volunteering projects. These are about the unexpected benefits that some people responding to surveys found in working from home. I personally hate it, but happy to know that there's somebody who likes it. This is about the increase in digital engagement in arts and culture, which of course is a very obvious and natural trend, but is still worth to be said. Professional athletes donating to COVID. Many Americans, they also said that their faith even grew. And potentially this concept can be repeated for other causes. When the Black Lives Matter movement started, we absolutely felt that we needed to spotlight it as well. And I guess you see the point. You see the simplicity of the project in this case, but also in here, and this is back to my point in how to design experiences, really the design of the concept and the design of the format, the idea that these are like windows that we see through in the lookout for happy data that are represented in a way that are kind of like pills of vitamins of happy data, how it makes them consistent. And so the website is up and running, and if you are in the mood for positive news, you can check it out at happy-data.co. So, okay, there's another experience that I want to share before a final project. So this is something that we probably all can relate to, and it deals with information on the medical field. So this project is a collaboration with my dear friend and guitar player, Kaki King. So 2 years ago, Kaki's 3-year-old daughter, Cooper, unfortunately was diagnosed with a condition called ITP. So it is an autoimmune disease where her body attacks her platelets and then leads to spontaneous bruises, burst blood vessels called petechia all over her body, and in the most terrifying cases, even internal bleeding. So for 4 months, we collected and combined qualitative, quantitative data from her daughter's hospital tests and qualitative observation from Kaki, so data from her life, her whole level of stress, the main episode that happened. And she decided to share this very personal journey, but not with words, but through this data that I visualized in a way that you will not probably normally expect from medical data. So these data are very intimate and very intense and personal. So I asked myself, can a data visualization evoke empathy and activate people also at an emotional level and not only as a cognitive one? And so I started to structure a fluid timeline to tell the story of these very hard-fought months for Kaki and her family. So every symbol represented at a point, every white petal is a day. And the rhythm is broken. So the actual, you see the timeline is not linear. The rhythm is broken every time that Cooper was admitted to the hospital to check her platelet count. And the burst of red dots represent this value. And the higher the number, the better. So like you want to have many platelets. So these are the platelets count. And then we have data as observed by Kaki herself, like the purple splotches here to represent the visible bruises on Cooper's skin and their intensity. And this really, I painted these splotches and brushes in a way that could resemble what Kaki was observing. Or the pink dot for petechias, like really the blood marks on her skin and how spread out they were. And so that's the intensity, the number of petechia. I mean, of course, it's kind of like intuitive, but like for how Kaki observed them. Just getting back to the layering of the visualization. Then when Cooper was taking steroids, you will see these gray shapes affecting the days. Here's where Cooper had some incident that caused her skin to worsen, such as she fell at the park where she was bitten by a mosquito. And Kaki tours a lot, and so in the days when she was away, we included them in these dots, so she was really stressed out. But also there have been all of the positive moments, such as a fun birthday party for Cooper or her brother, and so we also visualize that, through these positive splotches. And I'm getting a little emotional. This project has been kind of very, very emotional for me. So it's just like building back this visualization. Then also there was all the level of stress and fear that Kaki had in this period. And so we also represented that. So she quantified it from 1 to 10, and we represented that through actually the number of these lines. And so this is kind of like the visualization of the 4 months. And we also had some hints of the handwritten notes that actually Kaki wrote on her diary. So this is really the complete visualization. And actually, Kaki also composed a piece of music that was actually the musicalization of this timeline, using exactly the same data that I used for the visualization and following this visualization to compose a piece of music, because this is how Kaki expressed herself. And so we premiered the project on a very big opera theater, and I'll play you now some part of the song, and I will ask you to just start thinking if you can feel something through data. So as you can probably see, this is not by any means a scientific representation of data, but I still think that it paints a pretty complete and very sensorial picture of this personal journey. And many people living similar experiences told us that the visualization made them feel part of Kaki's stories in a way that probably a blog post describing the experience wouldn't have. And I don't want to say that this can lead to any scientific breakthrough in the medical field. It's not the point of my work. But once more, I believe there's a world of unexplored, small, and intimate data that we often don't see if we apply a straightforward definition of what data is. A layer that we also don't see because usually visualizations often focus on the numbers and not on what the numbers represent. So here we can really connect to the visualization, I think. And so what if, for example, hospital and doctors could also speak this type of language to us? And I know many of you are wondering, Cooper is absolutely fine now. She's out of the danger zone. She's healthy and thriving, and she says hi. So I'm all good in that department. So I will definitely end on a lighter note. This last example is possibly the most exciting project I've ever worked on. It's a fashion collection that I designed for the fashion brand And Other Stories, which is part of the H&M group. So a data-driven collab collection that was out in stores on November last year. And it's a collection where the graphic patterns printed, embroidered, and sewed are the direct representation of, I think, again, very human data points. So I went and looked for data in the achievement of 3 unprecedented women who have been pioneers in previously male-dominated field and really paved the ground for other women to start and thrive. The 3 women are Ada Lovelace, Rachel Carson, and Mae Jemison. And for the 3 of them, at this point, you understand my process. I crafted datasets about their major accomplishments, so really what they did, their achievement, and then background information about their lives. Data that I then use to create the visual patterns that we'll see displayed in the collection. So hopefully beautiful patterns that you would want to wear, but they also have a meaning behind them. And to conclude this talk, you've seen my approach and the role the crafting dataset plays in my work. I will guide you through the process of the creation so that you see how data can inform all type of products and outcomes. So the first woman was Ada Lovelace, born in 1815. She is considered now to be the first computer programmer in history. And it was the first time that really somebody programmed a machine to do complex math. And so as a matter of fact, really originated in the discipline of computer science. I analyzed and visualized the structure and the mathematical form of the algorithm she wrote. Pretty nerd, I know. And in parallel, though, okay, I had the data in my mind. But then in parallel, I was looking for visual inspiration in pieces of art that could reflect the nature of the data that I was working with. So in this case, geometric, repetitive, but with variation. And I started to sketch different ways in which each one of the 36 steps of the algorithm and its variable could be represented. Starting also then to sketch how to display them in a piece of garment. And this is a selected option with vertical elements, one for each of the 36 steps of the algorithm. And then you start seeing how the repetition form an interesting visual model. Each one of the 36 lines of Ada's algorithm is one element with internal dividers really representing their variables. And without entering into details, you see from that legend that then I build a way for me to translate every, to make sure that every symbol, color, and divider and outside graphic elements represent data points that I found in the dataset. So this is the final pattern for Ada that leaps onto these 3 silhouettes that we designed together with the fashion team, the in-house team. And here are some ideas that I crafted on how we can place it all over or only on some accents, or as a bolder accent on a sweater, for example, or more creative placement. And these are the final pieces. And here you see how a pattern, like a pattern that is a data visualization, can be represented as its own unique comprehensive elements, or it can be repeated all over, or it can be breakthrough. I mean, again, here, we're not talking about scientific data visualization where people need to read how to land a plane based on these dashboards. So I think, you know, as much as we want it to be faithful to the data as a process, but also I think there's potential in this type of projects to be more creative visually. As part of the process, there have been a lot of back and forth between designing and testing, sending me samples from overseas, which I enjoyed. And as part of the shooting for the publicity, a beautiful model was posing as I recreated a legend behind her. So this was really the publicity material to show every potential customer that, you know, again, there's really a deep meaning behind what you're possibly wearing. And the process got repeated for all of the other women. So Rachel Carson, first environmental activist, and her book, Silent Spring, that was published in 1962, is the classic that really launched the environmental movement. So here I went and looked for data in the structure of the content of the book And in this case, I was building my visual inspiration around more organic shapes, really could represent the nature of the material she was working with. And these are the first sketches where every element could be a chapter on Rachel's book. And here I built the pattern. So every radial element is one of the 17 chapters. These lines are the number of paragraphs and their lengths. And on the left, there's the aggregation of core structural elements, such as punctuation, number of words. But then building on top of it, I looked in the whole book to see what were the nouns and adjectives that she mentioned the most, just zooming in. And then I looked into how much they have been mentioned per each chapter, which is ultimately then the lengths of the different colored lines that are in each chapter. And so building the final pattern as a mix of the look out of the book, the structural, but also the semantic analysis with different background colors. And these are the silhouettes that we started to work with for Rachel. Originally, that was a wetsuit. The one at the center, and it ended up being a body, but you know. So you get the point. Then placing patterns in different ways on the fabric, as I did with Ada, getting bolder with the sweater. And here we go with the final pieces. So once more, you do recognize that, you know, this is kind of like a unique pattern, but also, again, that it is displayed in these different ways. And this is, you know, this was one of the sample where the patterns and embroider on the fabric, and this is mind-blowing. They've done such a great job with the details. I am really pleased with the output. And again, the model where we are in them on the shooting. And you can really see how taller she is. I never posed close to her if we were both really standing. That was really, yeah. Anyway, finally, Mae Jemison, born in 1967 and still alive. She's been the first African-American woman astronaut. So I visualized the orbits of her 1992 Space Shuttle mission. And in this case, taking visual inspiration from circular patterns, recalling orbits. Starting to sketch the orbit's possible features. And finally landed on this version when one circle is one orbit, would have one number of and 26 of them. And this is the final pattern for Mae. So the symbols above represent which day she orbited around Earth in 1992, and the color shadow represent the time of the day for the orbit, so really a homage to her mission and the color of the sky and Earth as she saw it from above. And on the background, I represented the experiment that she performed on the 9 days, from radio transmissions to zero gravity investigation. And again, elements of the collection as we thought of them initially, possible placements, you totally get the point, on the shirt. And there they are. And in the sweater at the center, the elements are really kind of like applied on top of it. So it's kind of like a precious one with an extra puffer for the winter. And the model we are in them with the legend behind. And then for each woman, we also designed a t-shirt where we extracted one element of the pattern only as a bold signature. So you'll see Ada, Rachel, and Mae. And finally, when customers bought any of the garments in store, they got a paperback that I designed containing the pattern and the legend. So how to interpret what's in the texture. And again, it's always crucial. I know that probably not everyone will nerd out dissecting Ada's algorithm from here into the dresses, but at least they really know that what they're wearing have a deep meaning. And what excites me about this project and what I wanted and why I wanted to conclude with it, it's that for me, it's another step further to demystify data. And for example, I see this specific project as one of the possible evolution to the graphic t-shirt with a written message. In this case, the fabric itself becomes the message. And where every feature of a garment is deeply connected to information and messages that we are proud and happy to carry around with us. And the reason why I'm also particularly interested in this less conventional or perhaps more popular projects with data is that it's really their potential to reach a far wider audience and might start thinking about data in a different way. And the opportunity to discover and reveal the human side of data, which is, of course, the one that matters the most. So over the years, I built my practice and approach around what I call data humanism, which to me always means designing ways to connect numbers to what they really stand for, which are our ideas, unexplored and open questions about ourselves and our society. And then through design, making this new knowledge available for everyone to access and engage with. And I am really excited about the possibilities that, can be opened up, especially in this moment in time, by this way of looking at data. And I hope that you are too. Thank you.
All right, that was a very inspiring. All right, that was a very inspiring and thought-provoking masterclass session with our speaker, information designer and partner at Pentagram, Giorgia Lupi. So Georgia has mentioned a lot of interesting points about the different side of data that we usually don't see. There's a lot to take away, but here are some points that for sure resonated with all of us, from using data as a lens to actually discover, reveal, and focus on the nuances that computers cannot actually gather. And it's actually a good wake-up call for us that sometimes we were so busy looking at the perfect results that we already forgot to bring the truths we learned along the way. And another thing that's also interesting is that the data process doesn't usually end up with a pristine expert analysis, but we need to also consider it as the beginning of conversation. And most importantly, Georgia also introduced to us data humanism, which actually challenges the impersonality and technical approach to data. And she highlighted the need for us to really design and develop ways to connect and translate numbers to what they really stand for. And those three that we should always keep in mind would be people, knowledge, and behavior. And those are fascinating points. We know that many of you were amazed and moved with the stories that Georgia shared with us on how we can be able to connect data on our shared realities. And speaking of stories, please feel free to share with Georgia how much you love this session by putting some emojis in the comment section, because why not? Our guest might visualize your responses and feature it also on her data visualization hub. Exciting.
Oh,
so
all of the comments now. I was not aware of them before. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. So before we start the fireside chat session with Georgia, remember our poll question earlier? I think we are ready to show our verdict. Results, please. Okay, so if you were to visualize a daily or regular activity during the quarantine, what would it be? So as we can see on our results right now, around half or 50% of our audience right now would really visualize their Zoom meetings attended. So I'm pretty curious how many Zoom meetings guys have you attended within this week, and how many times you've said, "Can you see my screen?" or "Thank you" at the end of the session. And Netflix shows watched at around 22%. So pretty curious about what genres you guys watch on Netflix. And next would be your workout routine, which I practically can't relate off because I don't do that. And lastly is that the types of coffee drinks made at around 11%. So what do you think about the results, Georgia?
I think that's interesting. Of course. I mean, as you've seen, I'm already thinking about, okay, Zoom meeting attended. So how about visualizing how many you enjoyed? You were bored, how many you were just looking forward for them to end. And, thinking about Netflix show watched, did you watch by themselves? I think to me, it's all about then adding context. If I had to visualize something about my beginning of quarantine and lockdown, probably would have been moments of anxiety. So something that
I totally agree.
Say standard, but something that would be like, oh my God, how many times during the day I was anxious and why? And was I able to overcome the anxiety, or was I just overwhelmed? But this is interesting. I guess it's really a matter of asking the right questions. What is that you want to know? And if there's something around the Zoom meeting that you feel like, I feel that I'm really stressed out about these Zoom meetings, let's just pay attention into what is that stresses me out. Is the fact that they're back to back? Is the fact that, I feel that I don't speak for most of the time? Is the fact that I miss the human connection? And so that can start becoming data point that, to me, personal data collection is kind of like a different form of journaling in a way, like a more structured form of journaling.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thank you very much for showing us how humanizing data can also become a force for good, and how we can make it a truly meaningful representative of ourselves. I think that's really important. So going back, I think I have a couple of questions, because with all the amazing works that you have done that uplift people's energy amidst adversity or any challenges that they face every day, for sure, a lot of our audience right now are very curious on how does a Giorgia Lupi typically spends her day as an information designer, and how does that contribute to you or inspire you to create great work?
Well, I mean, my life has changed pretty much in the past 2 years. So I'd say that, before the lockdown, I mean, before the pandemic happened, I spent my day at Pentagram with my team, with my partners, which was really, really, really a very inspiring place. I think, sharing the office with, my 9 partners in New York who've been Paula Scher, Michael Beirut, and all of the others that have been really, again, shaping our visual culture was in and on itself a huge source of inspiration. And then working collaboratively with my team and really working with them and brainstorming with them, definitely being a critical guide, but at the same time sharing ideas is something that is really, really inspiring. And, living in New York, and again, I'm talking now before the pandemic, is a great source of inspiration. You walk around and you see diversity, you encounter different people, and the conversations that you have with different people really inform the way you think. And then again, before the pandemic, every day after work, you could go to an art opening, to a reading, to a presentation. And again, the people that you meet here have had extraordinary life. And so to me, that is the primary source of inspiration, really like being eyes open. Right now, I'm trying to do it my way. It's harder, and I think that then inspiration and motivation needs to come much more from inside. As everybody, I have been struggling in the beginning, and I'm still thinking about the fall and the lockdown. I live by myself now, but I see my friends sometimes socially distancing, and my boyfriend at night. So that's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I mean, what an amazing way to be actually more inspired and actually find more ways to learn how to work with data. And your routine actually cultivates that certain outlook that working with data is fun and normal. It isn't novel, it is not technical and not exceptional. And I think I really want to highlight more about when you mentioned about collaborative work. I think what we really love about working with data is that you don't really need to pretend an expert, and you really want to incorporate that diversity, that 360 point of view coming from your team to really come up with ideas, those different voices that makes the research more valuable. And I hope you guys who are all watching right now are all taking notes of this daily routine by Giorgia, only here at the International Design Conference. So I think another question that also triggers curiosity is really connected on maintaining accuracy in the context of data visualization and telling data stories. So we know that in the data process or research process, accuracy should always be the baseline and foundation. But how do we really strike balance between creativity and being analytical at the same time?
It really always depends on the goal. Again, if you are visualizing data for a pilot to land a plane, like a dashboard, well, there's only so much creativity that you can put into that because he needs to make decisions really fast. And so it's rather, green or red or very clear. Okay, so that's one thing. But there's the other spectrum, which is having people being able to engage in stories through data. I mean, it's really the balance between imagine a written article, a listicle of the 10 things that you need to know, and an op-ed, like a richer piece where people can take their time and also think about opinion. So I think, the accuracy in data representation is really about making sure that you don't mislead information, you don't misrepresent the information. But there's a fundamental question that is around the objectivity of data. And I believe that data is never objective because it always comes from someone who collects this. Right. So it's always authorial. And even if it comes from a device or a sensor to monitor trends, well, a human being designed the sensor and decided what to collect and what to leave out. And so if we start with this premise, then I think that having data is better than not having data, but the matter of accuracy becomes less about being objective and more about being true to the actual data that you have. Always representing and clarifying the sources and how you collected the data, and always giving people the opportunities to engage in their own way. I mean, I'll tell one more thing, which is there's also a fundamental difference between producing visualization that are static, like a fashion collection, a newspaper, and visualization that are interactive. When they're static, you paint a picture in time. There's a snapshot in time of that moment, and you as a designer are a full author. You decide exactly what is in this visualization. the more that you design interactive experiences with data where people can filter, organize, and ask their own questions, well, the more you become a facilitator as a designer, and then you leave people the opportunity to kind of like really enter the data from their own point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Georgia. I think it's really important to note that visualizing and telling stories through data is also a creative process. Sometimes you'll really need to start from scratch. Oftentimes, striking a balance would involve switching your head on the creative side and then switching it again on the analytical side, and start to evaluate and ask questions like, is it still valid? Is it still understandable? Is it still truthful and valid? Actionable rather. So I think one thing that we should also take into account is that don't treat data as a holy grail. It really involves the process of exploring and explaining. So I think we have a lot of incoming questions right now, and we're gonna take some questions from the audience and explore what they think about their topic. So this is a pretty interesting question. Like, what made you move from architecture to information design?
So I think that the two are related in a way. When I decided to study architecture, it was like, oh my God, almost 20 years ago. I didn't know that data visualization was even a thing. And so for me, architecture was a way to merge my need for organization and structure and numbers with my need for creatively express myself. So I think that it was the right balance between a scientific and humanistic discipline that also had some creativity. And so if you think about data visualization and the approach that I have, with data, it's kind of related. So I think that progressively I got interested in urban mapping rather than building architecture, right? So kind of like information design processes to display even what can be possibly going on in a city. And then I started to realize that not only geographical data can be visualized. And so I started to get interested in the very first instances of data visualizations from like the past centuries. And I got so intrigued into the power of charts to tell stories about life that it was really natural. And I knew that I was never going to become an architect that designed the building. I was really much more interested again in the balance between numbers and logic and express them creatively and creating rule for yourself on how, kind of like even the drawing of the buildings were displayed. And I think that, because I started the first years that I studied in Italy, it was all analog. So I would spend a lot of time like drawing these very big floor plans with different ink pens of different thicknesses and like layering the informations for this like floor plan. I think that shaped my aesthetic and my process anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That was an awesome sentiment of how you move from information design and architecture. And I think it's also important to highlight that the world is really changing, especially on the side of information design and becoming a data strategist, data analyst, or someone who specializes on data visualization, that it's not all about being statistically adept anymore. It's not all about being good in coding and programming. Because I think the 21st century data specialists of today is really the people who can balance that impact storytelling, being a masterful of design and creativity, and lastly is really community engagement or community building. So there was an absolutely inspiring story of you from architecture to information design and how you were able to connect those two worlds. So another question that I think is pretty interesting also is that wait, let me check because there's a lot of interesting questions right now. I don't know what to pick.
I know. I just like to get all the comments. I want to tell everybody.
Yeah.
It's warming my heart. So my heart is like all of your comments are really, really beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
How do you foster an environment that encourages collaboration, and how do you encourage people to open up and contribute data or ideas? I think this is also connected with what you have mentioned earlier about working with a really diverse team. So what do you think about it?
I mean, this is such a great question. I think it's a matter of really being able to listen and to make everybody on the team, even the intern that joined at the last moment, feel that they have a voice to say. And then, of course, I mean, being, let's say, creative director, a leader, or anything that you are in an organization, then you need to make decisions, and ultimately you need to say, okay, but this is the direction where we're going. But I think it's really important all the time that you're taking a direction to fully explain your rationale. So saying, really, this idea is incredible, so we can really work on these and developing that in this way. And also, though, we need to remember that the final client's goal is X, Y, Z. And, you know, if you remember the first meetings, we are going to do it in these particular ways. So to me, it's about never saying, no, this I don't like, no, this is really always about, you know, if I think that this is a very valuable idea, amazing. I mean, I'm not really jealous and precious of having my ideas out. It's all about making sure that the goal and the success of the projects will be, you know, met. And also making sure, to me, I mean, being a designer and inspiring my team, making sure to push them and really to push them forward and to say, okay, how can we do even more? How can we think even beyond what we've done already? And I think it's also very important to keep them inspired. And so this is also sometimes, and I do that a lot, to work together with them on self-initiated projects that are not only clients' projects, but our ideas that start from us, from a team, like, you know, having a brainstorming of like, you know, what is a topic that we as a team really care about? And, you know, in the pandemic, we did quite a few. We did a few others that I didn't show today. And then really having them be very active in that so that they can also feel that they are part of the process of deciding what projects we take on. Also, ultimately, I think it's just it's a human thing. I mean, you just really need to encourage people to be themselves and to explore, to push them forward. And but it's really about listening to them first.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think the beauty of working with data teams and with clients is really, it's really having the mantra of you shouldn't work alone. It should always have that 360 point of view. Everyone's welcome. We build a longer table to actually gain all their insights, how we can work together and come up with crazy creative questions that would really create that impact. And I love also the point that you highlighted about the clients, because most especially I know you also experience some challenges for sure working with different industries who, or sometimes with clients who will just be present when there's already a problem with the project, or usually they are not involved with the process. So it's really important to establish that communication flow and to make sure that you are all on the same page. And what's more important about the collaboration is that you're learning different worlds and you open your eyes into a different perspective and different ideas that could make that data project better. So I think let's go for another question. A lot of questions. I actually don't know what to choose anymore because are all interesting. So coming a question from the Facebook, that person is a huge fan of the concept of human data, but are there negative or problematic aspects arising with it? For example, when the data visualization becomes too persuasive.
That's such an interesting point. So I guess I would still compare it to, say, a journalistic piece of writing about anything else. So what if the article is written too well and is so compelling? Or what if a movie around, a documentary around a topic is like so well produced and with such great actors that it becomes too persuasive? I think that every piece of communication can become too persuasive exactly because of communication. But if you think about it, it is also about people. There are people who speak and they're like completely persuasive, whatever they're saying, and there are people who say the exact same thing and they're not persuasive. So I would take it back to try to make the population a little bit more data literate and to teach everybody the concept that data is not objective. And from there on, we can really treat data as an incredible tool for communicating. It is an incredible tool for seeing patterns and to monitor phenomena. But at the same time, we as a population need to be aware, again, that there's always the presentation aspect. And then, about data humanism, I don't believe that data humanism or what I do is for everybody. Honestly, very few things in the world are for everybody. So to me, it's really much more, probably, again, a big bank that needs to monitor financial transactions overseas. I think there are parts of what I do that can be interesting for them to add some context and in the way that they do communicate to their clients. But in the system that they collect data, they probably don't really need to hear anything from me, you know? So I think that, again, it's probably better to say that what I do might be particularly interesting for people that are interested in highlighting some sort of like more qualitative society-wide aspects on the data. So having the data, but also at the same time making this data more relatable and reliable for people. So yeah.
Yeah,
I'm a designer primarily, so I'm not a data scientist. I'm not politically involved with data, and I make it pretty clear, even though I read a comment that said data is political in nature, which I do agree with. But I think, you know, it's really also important to understand that all of my approach comes from a design perspective and from a perspective of designing for audiences that might need to understand and to get access to knowledge.
absolutely. I think the concept of data humanism really provides us an idea that even though there's really an emergence of machines that can really gather data, it's irreplaceable. It's really looking at ways that there could always be a human and technology connection, and that the human connection is one important element that we shouldn't forget. And speaking about persuasiveness, I think it really depends upon your communication goal. Like there are clients who just prefer to have simple dashboards, and there are clients who prefer a rich and dense narrative. So before we I think we have one more question before we proceed to more questions. Okay, let me check here because there's really a lot of questions right now. Okay, this one is related on being overwhelmed working with data. Do you have any best practices not to get overwhelmed with data, especially if the data are too scientific or technical in nature?
Again, it's a matter of figuring out what's your question, like what's your entry point to get to the data set, what is that you need to know. And if you're clear about, okay, this project or, you know, is about XYZ, which is really about defining the goal, is not about entering a data analysis with a hunch already, but like really is about defining a goal. And then if you know that your goal for knowledge, your need for knowledge is such as the one that you defined, I think it's really hard to get overwhelmed because ultimately, again, you know what success look like. And it's about figuring out the beginning and the end of a data collection, again, depending on a goal. It's about figuring out what are the interesting attributes. Of course, I can collect everything, but what is important here? Limiting yourself to adding 3, 4, 5 parameters. And also, I think that having to then visualize data, as if you then understand the discipline of data visualization design, can be a good boundary because you know that you only have so many colors that the human eyes perceive, and so you know that you will only have so many categories that you can represent through colors, and you know that as much as you can layer a lot of information, well, there is a moment in which the visualization will become overwhelming, and so you need to take a step back and even in the data collection process, like stop yourself first. So but I would really just, you know, my core answer is it's really about defining the goal, defining what you want to know, and it's starting to ask questions to this data set. And then it starts to become less of a fuzzy, overwhelming blob into like, okay, I have a goal here.
Yeah, I believe it's really all about the goal at the end of the day and what you really want to know about it. But it's also important that when you already have that specific goal, it's also important to dig deeper and not just be boxed with a single idea. So a lot of interesting questions, and I think Georgia, these questions are also connected with the value of fostering data literacy to actually bridge the gap between the technical and non-technical. A lot of organizations are actually investing a lot of time, effort, and money to equip their teams with data literacy skills to future-proof. So what are the strategies or tactics that organizations should design and implement to empower their teams to speak and work with data effectively?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, working with data is still a pretty new thing for all of us, even though it has been going on for the past, I mean, I say 10, 15, 20 years even. We are still not really a data literate population. So I really think that in general, we are on the right track because Even though I personally don't use BI tools, I work with developers that can really code ways of analyzing data from scratch. I think that for many organizations, even just the idea that they empower their employees to be able to actually analyze data with these easier tools, it's really great. I also think that it's really about, again, data literacy is beyond the skills and the tools, but it's about having a data mindset and understanding what data means. I think that the biggest improvement probably could be empowering these organizations with designers as well that can represent data in ways that can be, beyond what a standard tool can do, or at least helping data analysts communicate what they find in a more communicative way. So really, I think that the collaboration and like injecting design and communication design into people who work with data more can be a great step forward for all of us. Work with design.
Yeah, well, that's a new learning for me. And based on what you have said, I think we really need to treat the data process or data analysis as an opportunity for collaboration and community engagement. Data literacy, as you have mentioned, is not just all about being able to understand numbers, but being able to drive meaningful insights from those numbers. And it's a significant skill for everyone, not just for experts, and everyone can be proficient at it as long as we provide proper platforms and proper opportunities for them to be able to be more connected with the context. So sometimes I think based on your research or data process, sometimes you also just need to make data messy and explore and understand the context to actually feel more empowered to ask questions and dig deeper. And I think organizational leaders and even teams need to champion it and establish a culture with data at its core. So that's it as we wrap up. I mean, those are a lot of questions and interesting questions. And thank you to our audience for tonight. I do hope that you've enjoyed listening and chatting with us. It's such an honor to have been able to hear you speak about what you do, Giorgia, also. And I know that I'm not the only one saying that I feel more empowered now as a researcher, a data strategist, and designer after your session. So thank you very much, Giorgia. I'm your number one Filipino fan. So thank you as well. I would like to thank our partners, Adobo Magazine, our official media partner, Buen Salido Architects, and British Council, our event partners. So everyone, I hope you have enjoyed this session, and see you again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. where we will be talking about net zero buildings with Albert Bicol. To close our night, here's another mindfulness exercise from the Harmonizing series of Dr. Marian Alonzo, Medical Chief of the Farm at San Benito. Thank you again, everybody, and have a good night and good morning.
Continue to breathe in and out, and really connecting to this breath and to quote Hildegard of Bingen, how wonderful is this breath that awakened humankind. Staying with the breath, I invite you to listen to this sound of the crystal singing bowls. Let every cell in your body welcome and receive this sound. This sound helps the cells go back and remember the healthy blueprint.
We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards man out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come. And we must think only that whatever comes is given to us by a world directive full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely to live out of pure trust without any security in existence. Trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly, nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. And let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and every evening.
Now, if you find yourself quite unsettled because of the news that you hear on social media or the television, these are some exercises that you can use. So this one is basically like pushing away the sliding door. And it's a gentle way of just letting go of energies that do not serve you anymore. And then you come out and really shine your light.